I know a lot of arranged marriages who have built incredible partnership marriages.
Oh yeah,
And
I'm
so
pro.
you like,
I'm pro arranged marriage. It's one of my controversial takes.
oh, that's interesting. Oh, we should
Yeah.
talk about this because, like,
Okay.
Indian culture, arranged marriage is still very much a thing. Um, all of the arranged marriages that I've known in my immediate family have led to what seem okay. Obviously, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but seemingly on the surface, loving, very supportive relationships where they've raised um, really well-adjusted children who have gone out into the world and done great things.
Mhm.
Um, and
And
so,
India's
yeah,
divorce rate is like 1/30th of the USA's.
interesting.
It's like under 1%. It's like 1%, right?
Yeah, you don't know how much of divorce is sort of a cultural thing because there is, yeah, like there are statistics on if your parents were divorced, your likelihood of getting divorced is astronomically higher than if not. So you wonder whether there's like a an acceptance of the idea of divorce culturally in America versus India. But I do think that like this whole concept of the paradox of choice, I've never really thought about it in the context of finding a partner, but um, if you need to make it work with someone, we find ways to make it work. If you find a way to like crawl through the mud and find your way to the other side on certain things when you need to, if you know that you can just press the eject button immediately, you like don't kind of don't start to vibe in the first second of something, you just press the eject button. It's very hard to build the long lasting meaningful relationships if you press eject at the first sign of any sort of struggle. That's sort of the equivalent of like going to the gym and at the first sign of like muscle strain, you just sort of are like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to walk on the treadmill, right? Like you're probably not going to make a lot of progress in the muscle building. Same thing as a work. Like if you the first sign of struggle, you just quit at the thing, you're probably not going to build the business. And so I wonder whether that same rule kind of applies to relationships where um, it is this cultural propensity to press the eject button too quickly that is leading to less happiness in our marital choices.
Yeah, I think so. And that loops back into why so many people of our generation and younger are do have question marks around marriage and all that, because a lot of it is from that whole culture and the legal system around it of just like, oh boy, well, if so many people are almost just sort of treating it as extended dating, let's say, with sort of extra steps, then there's people who are worried about getting into it. I wanted to kind of go into the arranged marriage thing a little more because I want to say like this is firstly I want to say I'm pro arranged marriage. I'm anti coercion, right? So I'm not
Mm.
saying like people who don't want to be together should be forced kicking and screaming together or anything like that. As I've just lived my 38 years of life and the experiences with it, and I look at things now and I look at things around the world. Um, Firstly, and this is going to upset some people, but I just think it's objectively true. Um, in most cases, parents make better decisions. They make better decisions than their children do. They have more wisdom, especially when we're talking about something like love and relationships. Let's be real. Billions of people make bad choices all of the time, often because they're young and they're horny and they're being driven by hormones and this and this and this, right? But when you actually think of a marriage and the stability that I believe a marriage is supposed to have, and the unison not just of two individuals, but actually bringing two different families or tribes together, let's say, then yeah, parents have a lot of insight and wisdom where like if they're gonna make a suggestion, right? If they're already doing the vetting, right? They're not just there like how are people meeting now? They're literally swiping through apps like it's a catalog, just looking at seeing what people look like and a
Yeah.
couple of basic stats about them. And people are making decisions based off of that. Whereas in the past, or even in certain parts of the world, it's like, okay, we know this family, we know their values, they share certain things in culture, religion, whatever. Can that be too restrained? Yes, of course it can be too restrained, right? Which is again why I want to make it clear I'm very anti coercion. I'm not saying people shouldn't have freedom of choice, but I'm essentially talking about like matchmaking in the same way that if you had a good friend, maybe even an older friend who knows you very well, knows your values, knows all that, if they were to, set you up as a single person with someone, the probability that that is going to work out is going to be much higher than flicking through a random app and just going, oh, she looks hot. She looks hot. It's like, no, I already know she has all these certain characters, this is her background, this is like you guys are already aligned. So yeah, like I think it's interesting that people kind of freak out at the concept of arranged marriage, but not the concept of matchmaking. Because when I say it, I really kind of just mean matchmaking.
Yeah, there's a few things that I want to peel back at. I'd say I broadly agree with you on this point. Really, for a couple reasons. I mean, first off, while you were talking, I was looking up a couple stats. Over 50% of marriages in the world are still arranged. In the most recent thing that I could find, um, which is just crazy to think about. Living in the United States, you're like, you can't imagine that a lot of the world still operates this way. I think one of the things that you are solving for. Um, uh, in building a great relationship, you have to prioritize growing in love over falling in love. That has gotten lost in the social media age. Social media has convinced you that falling is the important piece. It's the Instagram moments, it's the perfect filtered photos, it's the like glamorous, glitzy things. That is not what a great relationship is built on. A great relationship is built on crawling through the mud with someone. It's through the struggle, it's through the moments of doing nothing. The moments where you're in your pajamas, you're not dressed up, you're not on a fancy date, you're not on a honeymoon. That's the growing, not the falling. But if you are convinced at the outset that the falling is what matters, and you lose sight of the fact that real relationships are built through the growing, you are going to be sorely disappointed. You are actually setting yourself up for failure at the outset. And so I think one of the reasons, one of the things you're getting at when it comes to arranged marriage is that by default, an arranged marriage is focused on the growing because you're taking the falling out of the equation, right? You're like, you're putting the two people together. You're saying, okay, you two are going to get married. You're paired. And then your entire focus is on the growing. There's not really like, you're sort of removing the whole like falling phase because it's connected. And now you can just focus on building a partnership with this person. There's also by default a long-term orientation. When we think about relationships, actually this applies not just to romantic relationships, to normal partnerships, to friendships, to business relationships, whatever. People are very short term in the way that they think. Uh, Everyone uses the word networking. Oh, I want to network. That implies that there's a transaction, right? I'm like, oh, Zuby, I want to network with you, right? That's like me basically coming with my hand out, asking you for something. Hey, I want to get something from you. A real relationship, you say, you take the lens, okay, I'm going to know this person for 50 years. How would I operate? If I'm going
Mhm.
to know this person for 50 years, there's no way in heck that I'm coming in and asking for something at the outset. There's no way I'm making it transactional because I'm going to be with this person. So I'm going to give with no expectation of return. I'm going to help solve problems along the way. I'm going to have hard conversation. I'm going to do the things that are building it for the long term. And I think that one of the things that you are getting at when you're talking about the merits of an arranged marriage is that it forces a long term orientation in both parties at the outset of it. So it's interesting. I've never thought about arranged marriages at this length. Um,
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I've seen them really work in people that I've been around on the Indian side of my family. But it's interesting to just think about one of the things that they're sort of getting at.
Yeah. It's not the direction I thought the podcast would go in, but I think it's an I think it's a genuinely interesting topic. I think that Westerners in particular, and we're all Westerners to an extent. Um, I think when people hear the word arranged, they think forced. Like
Yeah, it's
they
actually a
lump
bad
them.
term.
Yeah,
It's a
they
bad
lump
term.
them together because I'm very against, like I said, I'm against coercion, I'm against force. Um, when I say arrange, yeah, you could just call it like matchmaking from the side of the families, essentially. And it's you said something interesting there because so many, sadly, so many couples when they break up or even marriages when they split apart, you hear that term all the time, which is a uniquely modern Western term, which is we fell out of love or we grew apart, which I think actually hits right at the core kind of what you're saying of the falling in love versus growing in love, right? Because if it's just an infatuation thing of, oh my gosh, this person is so hot and I want to be around them all the time. Look, whether someone looks at this from a spiritual perspective or a scientific perspective, that super hot butterfly feeling, like you're not going to sustain a 50-year relationship off of that. And again, I think our ancestors were wise enough to know this. So it was more like, okay, cool. Like there's nothing wrong with love and you should certainly be attracted. But if you think like it's going to be that fiery thing like the entire time, you are completely setting yourself up for disappointment. And as soon as you no longer are feeling that, then I think that's when people do the, oh, we just grew apart or we just fell out of love. Like there's nothing fundamentally wrong. They're kind of just going through a normal process. And I think this is why you have some people, they'll do this one, two, three, four, three, four, five times, and the same thing keeps happening over and over. And it's not even that something's fundamentally wrong. It's just like the expectations are not rooted in reality of how relationships actually work and develop. I
Yeah.
say all this, by the way. I'm not an expert. Like I've never been married, so I'm just I'm just
No, I
speaking
think,
from a
but
common sense
I
perspective.
don't think either of us is saying we're experts. I do think what we're weighing in on is sort of just what the sort of underlying principle is of the practice. I do think the more I think about it, the term arranged marriage is actually like it's not a great term. It's not really what we're kind of talking about in some sense. And I think it is like it is an important distinction that you make. Obviously, no one is pro coercion. You know, we believe in free will and liberty. Um, but I do think you're right. Like the obsession with physical attraction is also just dangerous. It's sort of the exact same thing, but in the dating world of what I was talking about being narrowly focused on money. When you focus on the one thing, you can lose sight of the bigger thing very easily. And physical attraction as the sole exclusive focus, which is what happens when you're doing the like swipe left, swipe right game to a lot of people, not to everybody, is not conducive to building a long-term relationship. Physical attraction cannot be the foundation of the house that your relationship is. It has to be something deeper than that because physical attraction fades, right? Like you are not always going to be hot as a guy or as a girl. You're eventually going to get old. You're going to be wrinkly. You know, you're not going to be like the stunner that you might be now. And if that is the foundation of your entire relationship, um, that is really going to be painful at some point in one direction or in both. Um, it can be a part of it, and I actually would argue it should be a part of it. I think it's a great thing to be physically attracted to somebody. I'm extraordinarily physically attracted to my wife, but it is not the sole foundation of our relationship, nor was it ever that. You have to have, spiritual attraction, energetic attraction, intellectual attraction, emotional attraction. All of those things contribute to that foundation of having a solid house. And so I actually think that matchmaking services, when I think they work well, are probably working well because they are focusing on things that go beyond just the physical. They're probably taking into account the physical in an ideal sense, but there's also all of these other things that we know make someone attractive to us. And you're capturing that, which you just by definition cannot do in a snapshot of a single picture of a person that you're deciding on, in an instant.
This episode is brought to you by Sambrosa, the best way to get your 8 hours of rest. If, like me, you sometimes struggle with nighttime restlessness and allergies, then Sambrosa Night Syrup could be a game changer for you. Sambrosa contains a natural base of 7 organic herbs, honey, and a small amount of antihistamine. It's effective and soothing with no harsh chemicals, no high fructose corn syrup, and no artificial flavors or dyes. I've been using Sambrosa for several months now, and I can personally vouch for its effectiveness when it comes to improving my quality of rest at night. I also love the fact that they're a family-owned company who share my values of faith, freedom, and integrity. My listeners can try Sambrosa today and get 10% off by going to sambrosa.com/Zuby10. That's SAMBROSA.com/Zuby10 for 10% off your order. Try Sambrosa today and wake up ready to embrace life's opportunities. Go to sambrosa.com/Zuby10 and try it out.